Musculoskeletal system. Frontal plane. Frontal plane. Median plane. Median plane. Sagittal plane. Sagittal plane. Transverse plane. Transverse plane. Superior. Superior. Cranial. Cranial. Cephalic. Cephalic. Inferior. Inferior. Caudal. Caudal. Anterior. Anterior. Ventral. Ventral. Posterior. Posterior. Dorsal. Dorsal. Medial. Medial. Intermediate. Intermediate. Lateral. Lateral. Proximal. Proximal. Distal. Distal. Superficial. Superficial. Deep. Deep. Supine. Supine. Prone. Prone. Periosteum. Periosteum. Compact bone. Compact bone. Spongy bone. Spongy bone. Cancellous bone. Cancellous bone. Endosteum. Endosteum. Medullary cavity. Medullary cavity. Bone marrow. Bone marrow. Bone shaft. Bone shaft. Diaphysis. Diaphysis. Epiphysis. Epiphysis. Metaphysis. Metaphysis. Epiphyseal plate. Epiphyseal plate. Epiphyseal line. Epiphyseal line. Osteocyte. Osteocyte. Osteoblast. Osteoblast. Osteoclast. Osteoclast. Chondrocyte. Chondrocyte. Chondroblast. Chondroblast. Long bone. Long bone. Short bone. Short bone. Flat bone. Flat bone. Irregular bone. Irregular bone. Sesamid bone. Sesamid bone. Cerebrocranium. Cerebrocranium. Frontal bone. Frontal bone. Parietal bone. Parietal bone. Occipital bone. Occipital bone. Temporal bone. Temporal bone. Sphenoid bone. Sphenoid bone. Ethmoid bone. Ethmoid bone. Facial bone. Facial bone. Maxilla. Maxilla. Maxillary bone. Maxillary bone. Zygomatic bone. Zygomatic bone. Nasal bone. Nasal bone. Lacrimal bone. Lacrimal bone. Palatine bone. Palatine bone. Inferior nasal concha. Inferior nasal concha. Vomer. Vomer. Mandible. Mandible. Hide bone. Hide bone. Clavicle. Clavicle. Scapular. Scapular. Humerus. Humerus. Radius. Radius. Ulna. Ulna. Carpal bone. Carpal bone. Metacarpal bone. Metacarpal bone. Phalanx. Phalanx. Hip bone. Hip bone. Sacrum. Sacrum. Coccyx. Coccyx. Femur. Femur. Patella. patella, tibia, tibia, fibula, fibula, tarsal bone, tarsal bone, calcaneus, calcaneus, metatarsal bone, metatarsal bone, phalanx, phalanx, joint capsule, joint capsule, joint cavity, joint cavity, synovial membrane, synovial membrane, synovial fluid, synovial fluid, ligament, ligament, bursa, bursa, meniscus, meniscus, tendon, tendon, aponeurosis, aponeurosis, fascia, fascia, carpal tunnel, carpal tunnel, intervertebral joint, intervertebral joint, facet joint, facet joint, humeroradial joint, humeroradial joint, humerulnar joint, humerulnar joint, wrist joint, wrist joint, radiocarpal joint, radiocarpal joint, intercarpal joint, intercarpal joint, carpometacarpal joint, carpometacarpal joint, metacarpophalangeal joint, metacarpophalangeal joint, interphalangeal joint, interphalangeal joint, hip joint, hip joint, knee joint, knee joint, ankle joint, ankle joint, talocrural joint, talocrural joint, intertarsal joint, intertarsal joint, tarsometarsal joint, tarsometarsal joint, metatarsophalangeal joint, metatarsophalangeal joint, hyaline cartilage, hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, hyaline cartilage, fibrous cartilage, fibrous cartilage, lumbago, lumbago, coccygodynia, coccygodynia, ostalgia, ostalgia, osteoragia, osteoragia, crepitation, crepitation, syphilitic pseudoparalysis, syphilitic pseudoparalysis, sequestration, sequestration, supernumerary bone, supernumerary bone, phantom limb pain, phantom limb pain, callus, callus, delayed union, delayed union, non-union, non-union, malunion, malunion, arthralgia, arthralgia, ankylosis, ankylosis, arthrogryposis, arthrogryposis, hemarthrosis, hemarthrosis, hydarthrosis, hydarthrosis, tophus, tophus, osteitis, osteitis, osteomyelitis, osteomyelitis, periostitis, periostitis, epiphysitis, epiphysitis, spondylitis, spondylitis, pot disease, pot disease, Paget disease, Paget disease, coccitis, coccitis, phalangitis, phalangitis, osteoporosis, osteoporosis, osteomalacia, osteomalacia, scurvy, scurvy, rickets, rickets, osteoma, osteoma, exostosis, osteoma, osteosarcoma, osteosarcoma, Ewing tumor, Ewing tumor, chordoma, chordoma, multiple myeloma, multiple myeloma, Fibrosarcoma. Fibrosarcoma. Pyogenic arthritis. Pyogenic arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis. Osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis. Degenerative arthritis. Degenerative arthritis. Gouty arthritis. Gouty arthritis. Ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis. Rheumatism. Rheumatism. Synovitis. Synovitis. Tendinitis. Tendinitis. Tenosynovitis. Tenosynovitis. Fibrositis. Fibrositis. Bursitis. Bursitis. Dislocation. Dislocation. Subluxation. Subluxation. Sprain. Sprain. Strain. Strain. Disc extrusion. Disc extrusion. Muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy. Frozen shoulder. Frozen shoulder. Tennis elbow. Tennis elbow. Chondroma. Chondroma. Chondroblastoma. Chondroblastoma. Chondromatosis. Chondromatosis. Chondrosarcoma. Chondrosarcoma. Synovioma. Synovioma. Chondrectomy. Chondrectomy. Chondrotomy. Chondrotomy. Osteotomy. Osteotomy. Craniotomy. Craniotomy. Sequestrectomy. Sequestrectomy. Amputation. Amputation. Bone graft. Bone graft. Closed reduction. Closed reduction. Open reduction. Open reduction. Arthrotomy. Arthrotomy. Arthroscope. Arthroscope. Arthroplasty. Arthroplasty. Arthrectomy. Arthrectomy. Arthrodesis. Arthrodesis. Bunionectomy. Bunionectomy. Arthrocentesis. Arthrocentesis. Tenorrhaphy. Tenorrhaphy. Striated muscle. Striated muscle. Smooth muscle. Smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle. Visceral muscle. Visceral muscle. Voluntary muscle. Voluntary muscle. Involuntary muscle. Involuntary muscle. Muscle bundle. Muscle bundle. Muscle fiber. Muscle fiber. Myofibril. Myofibril. Myofilament. Myofilament. Endomysium. Endomysium. Paramysium. Paramysium. Epimysium. Epimysium. Sternocleidomastoid muscle. Sternocleidomastoid muscle. Scalenus muscle. Scalenus muscle. Suboccipital muscle. Suboccipital muscle. Pectoralis major muscle. Pectoralis major muscle. Pectoralis minor muscle. Pectoralis minor muscle. Subclavius muscle. Subclavius muscle. Serratus anterior muscle. Serratus anterior muscle. Intercostal muscle. Intercostal muscle. Diaphragm. Diaphragm. External oblique muscle of abdomen. External oblique muscle of abdomen. Internal oblique muscle of abdomen. Internal oblique muscle of abdomen. Rectus abdominis muscle. Rectus abdominis muscle. Transversus abdominis muscle. Transversus abdominis muscle. Quadratus lumborum muscle. Quadratus lumborum muscle. Trapezius muscle. Trapezius muscle. Levator scapulae muscle. Levator scapulae muscle. Rhomboid muscle. Rhomboid muscle. Latissimus dorsi muscle. Latissimus dorsi muscle. Erector spiny muscle. Erector spiny muscle. Multifidus muscle. Multifidus muscle. Deltoid muscle. Deltoid muscle. Supraspinatus muscle. Supraspinatus muscle. Infraspinatus muscle. Infraspinatus muscle. Teres minor muscle. Teres minor muscle. Teres major muscle. Teres major muscle. Subscapularis muscle. Subscapularis muscle. Biceps brachii muscle. Biceps brachii muscle. Coracobrachialis muscle. Coracobrachialis muscle. Brachialis muscle. Brachialis muscle. Brachioradialis muscle. Brachioradialis muscle. Triceps brachii muscle. Triceps brachii muscle. Anconius muscle. Anconius muscle. Pronator teres muscle. Pronator teres muscle. Pronator quadratus muscle. Pronator quadratus muscle. Supinator muscle. Supinator muscle. Psoas major muscle. Psoas major muscle. Psoas minor muscle. Psoas minor muscle. Iliacus muscle. Iliacus muscle. Gluteus maximus muscle. Gluteus maximus muscle. Gluteus medius muscle. Gluteus medius muscle. Gluteus minimus muscle. Gluteus minimus muscle. Tensor fasciae lati muscle. Tensor fasciae lati muscle. Sartorius muscle. Sartorius muscle. Quadriceps femoris muscle. Quadriceps femoris muscle. Pectineus muscle. Pectineus muscle. Adductor longus muscle. Adductor longus muscle. Adductor brevis muscle. Adductor brevis muscle. Adductor magnus muscle. Adductor magnus muscle. Gracilis muscle. Gracilis muscle. Hamstring muscle. Hamstring muscle. Tibialis anterior muscle. Tibialis anterior muscle. Peroneus longus muscle. Peroneus longus muscle. Fibularis longus muscle. Fibularis longus muscle. Gastrocnemius muscle. Gastrocnemius muscle. Soleus muscle. Soleus muscle. Myalgia. Myalgia. Myodynia. Myodynia. Myocele. Myocele. Hyperkinesia. Hyperkinesia. Spasm. Spasm. Cramp. Cramp. Rigidity. Rigidity. Tremor. Tremor. Myasthenia. Myasthenia. Hypotonia. Hypotonia. Myotonia. Myotonia. Contracture. Contracture. Paraplegia. Paraplegia. Paresis. Paresis. Tetraparesis. Tetraparesis. Tetraplegia. Tetraplegia. Myositis. Myositis. Tendinitis. Tendinitis. Polymyositis. Polymyositis. Myasthenia gravis. Myasthenia gravis. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Torticollis. Torticollis. Leiomyoma. Leiomyoma. Leiomyosarcoma. Leiomyosarcoma. Rhabdomyoma. Rhabdomyoma. Rhabdomyosarcoma. Rhabdomyosarcoma. Lipoma. Lipoma. Liposarcoma. Liposarcoma. Fasciectomy. Fasciectomy. Myotomy. Myotomy. Myopathy. Myopathy. Myoplasty. Myoplasty. Anti-inflammatory agent. Anti-inflammatory agent. Antipyretic. Antipyretic. Nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Analgesic. Analgesic. Narcotic analgesic. narcotic analgesic, simple fracture, simple fracture, closed fracture, closed fracture, compound fracture, compound fracture, open fracture, open fracture, comminuted fracture, comminuted fracture, impacted fracture, impacted fracture, complete fracture, complete fracture, incomplete fracture, incomplete fracture, green stick fracture, green stick fracture, compression fracture, compression fracture, depressed fracture, depressed fracture, pathologic fracture, pathologic fracture, Cole's fracture, Cole's fracture, Smith fracture, Smith fracture, pot fracture, pot fracture, kyphosis, kyphosis, lordosis, lordosis, scoliosis, scoliosis, spina bifida, spina bifida, spinal stenosis, spinal stenosis, spondylomalacia, spondylomalacia, syndactyly, syndactyly, polydactyly, polydactyly, talipes, talipes,